is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Ukraine and Russia are reported to have made significant progress on a peace plan, including a ceasefire and Russian withdrawal.
Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace.
A personal appeal to US President Joe Biden as Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky makes an emotional appeal to the United States Congress.
NATO defence ministers are joined by Ukraine's ambassador at an emergency meeting. We'll be at NATO headquarters.
And China battles a new surge in coronavirus cases, its biggest outbreak in 2 years. Lockdowns and mass testing are back.
Ukraine and Russia are reported to have made significant progress on a peace deal, including a ceasefire and Russian withdrawal. Ukraine, according to the Financial Times, would have to declare its neutral status and limits on its armed forces.
Meanwhile, as the conflict enters its third week, Russia has intensified its bombing campaign across Ukraine. 2 people were killed when an apartment block was shelled in Kharkiv, while an estimated 400,000 people remain trapped in the city of Mariupol.
Let's talk to our correspondent Michael Voss in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. Michael, what more do we know about the talks between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think we're finally starting to get a sense of what these negotiations are all about and the direction they're heading in. As you said, Ukraine would have to remain neutral and limits on its armed forces. President Zelensky has already said that he is prepared to state that Ukraine will not join NATO. Now, also that they're not to host foreign troops, foreign bases on their country, but in return that there would be an exchange for protection from its allies, the US, the UK and Turkey. What we don't know is what Ukraine would have to concede, and certainly there's no indication they want to give up their territory. Will they have to concede that Crimea, which was annexed 8 years ago, is now Russian territory? What about those 2 secessionist areas in Luhansk and Donetsk, which are expanding rapidly? That's one of the areas where Russian forces are broadening their controlled territory. Are they going to have to give that up, or would it become some sort of federal solution? I have to say there are those here in Ukraine who are saying that maybe these negotiations are really a stalling tactic on the Russians' part in order to give them time to regroup their forces.
Well, Michael, we know that very many keen on a ceasefire, yet the shelling continues. What's the latest on the casualties?
Well, yes. I mean, both the Ukrainian and Russians are taking military casualties, but it's the civilians that are really bearing the brunt of this conflict. We know that another apartment building was shelled in the capital, Kiev, and there were deaths there. The authorities in Kharkiv are saying 500 people have died recently in shelling there. Up in the northern town of Chernihiv, we're hearing reports that Russian soldiers opened fire and killed 10 people, civilians who were queuing for bread. And then there's Mariupol down in the south. It's still being shelled. There are 340 to 400,000 people still in there, trapped, starving, freezing, still no sign of aid getting in. So the casualties continue to mount.
Michael Voss in Lviv, thank you.
President Zelensky has renewed his call for a no-fly zone over Ukraine in a landmark address to the United States Congress. Zelensky warned the international community was facing the worst conflict since the Second World War and said the response to Russia's actions would define the next generation. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Caroline Malone in Washington. Caroline, what happened in the United States Congress today?
Well, as you said there, President Zelensky made that appeal to members of Congress in the Capitol building, live in a virtual forum to them, to try and get more US support for Ukraine. He made a direct appeal to US President Biden to be a world leader, in his interpretation, a world leader for peace, and that means providing more support for Ukraine. He also talked about 9/11 and how US people circumstances and how it's the same for Ukraine right now. They're feeling the shock of conflict and are suffering greatly. He also played a very emotional video showing some of the destruction that people are suffering in Ukraine and the civilian casualties, injuries and death, which certainly was emotive and did get a reaction from the members of Congress. Let's have more of a listen to what Zelensky said.
Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace. Peace in your country doesn't depend anymore only on you and your people. It depends on those next to you, on those who are strong. Strong doesn't mean weak. Strong is brave and ready to fight for the life of his citizens and citizens of the world.
We're actually expecting to hear from US President Biden any minute now, and he's expected to announce new ways in which the US will support Ukraine. Now, Congress and Biden have already announced $13.7 billion of aid. That's both humanitarian and military aid to go to Ukraine. But Zelensky was in his speech very much asking for the US to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would certainly be another step.
It certainly would. So what chances then of this requested no-fly zone over Ukraine?
There's definitely a feeling in Congress and amongst US people of sympathy and wanting to act and support Ukraine. But a no-fly zone is potentially unlikely. And the reason for that was outlined by Biden, but it's also been outlined by members of Congress just today after hearing Zelensky. If you imagine a scenario in which you have NATO planes in the air as well as Russian planes in the air, something could happen that could essentially kick off World War III, and that's not something that US President Biden wants to have anything to do with. So in that sense, a no-fly zone being implemented by the US and NATO is unlikely. However, there are other ways in which the US can continue to support Ukraine and help them stop Russian jets from flying over Ukraine and bombing different buildings. That, of course, is anti-aircraft weaponry. They've already supported by sending anti-tank weaponry. So there is a potential for more movement from the United States, but I would say at this particular point, a no-fly zone is unlikely because they don't want to escalate the conflict any further.
Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Vladimir Putin says Russia will survive sanctions. He's announced a range of domestic economic support measures, including more help for families.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
A small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
We look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mum is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bring all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world, on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. A tsunami warning has been issued for the east coast of Japan after a powerful earthquake.
The 7.3 magnitude quake struck under the sea about 50 kilometres offshore, close to Fukushima. The tremor was felt across much of the country, shaking buildings and causing power cuts in the capital, Tokyo. Our correspondent Phoebe Amoroso is in Tokyo. Phoebe, did you feel it?
Absolutely. It began with a short quake, first of all, and that was enough for me to feel like things were moving. I'm up close to the 40th floor, but this building is reinforced concrete, so that means that things don't shake as much as some of the other. If you've lived in Japan for a fair amount of time, you're aware that quite often there will be a shake, and then there will be followed up by another shake, and that's exactly what happened in this case. So first of all, I moved my glass back onto the table, and then that's when the longer shake struck, and that went on for quite some time. It's very hard to estimate exactly how long when you're in the moment, but I was under my table for at least 2 minutes. Prolonged shaking, the whole building was groaning, and I ended up feeling seasick, which was a new experience during an earthquake. So really, doors were swinging, quite an alarming experience here in Tokyo.
Phoebe, glad to see you're safe and well, though. Thank you for that update.
President Vladimir Putin says Russia is ready to discuss Ukraine's neutral status. He made his comments to government ministers while also addressing the impact of economic sanctions.
A range of domestic economic support measures were announced. New media laws strictly limit what correspondents can say about the conflict. Stuart Smith reports for us from Moscow.
He addressed what Russia continues to call the special military operation and repeated the accusations that what Russia is doing is done to prevent Ukraine from acquiring nuclear weapons and potentially using them against Russia. And he said that the troops that are near Kiev are there not to occupy the country, but to achieve the goals of Russia. He didn't outline specifically what those goals were, but he did remind the government and people watching that the goals did not involve the occupation of Ukraine. The negotiations indeed are being said to have made progress by the presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov. He seemed optimistic earlier today when talking to the press. He didn't go into the details of the negotiation, saying that while negotiations are ongoing, exactly what's being discussed should be kept reasonably under wraps, but did say they were approaching a point of dealing with specific points rather than general discussion. And similar comments made by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, saying that things did seem to be coming to the point where individual discussion points were being made. Again, back to the president's speech. Indeed, he touched on the economic impacts of Western sanctions, which he continues to say are almost tantamount to war against Russia. He noted that the inflation is going up, and that is having an impact on people's ability to buy things, and so indeed did give some comments and reports, did give some indication of how the Russian state could intervene to help people. He said, especially those in the public sector receiving state salaries, there will be an increase in their pay, he said, to try to tackle the difficulty now of food prices and prices of goods, especially technological equipment, that are rapidly increasing with the weakening ruble and with sanctions now imposed on the majority of Russia's industry. Although the central bank here in Russia has said it is able to counter the effects of Western sanctions in the domestic field, there are limits to what it can do outside of Russia. And so today is the deadline for 2 payments which Russia must make in dollars to fulfill its obligations, and it will be the first test of whether Russia really cannot or can pay back its foreign debts. It needs to pay around $117 million. It looks like, as things stand, the US Treasury would not allow those debts to be written off because of the sanctions on Russia's central bank. And if that's the case, that makes default very likely for Russia. There will be a 30-day grace period, which could provide some opportunity for Russia to find another way to pay back its debts. But if it can't, and that is what a lot of creditors are saying is likely to happen, Russia would default for the first time since 1917, and the effects of that would be calamitous for the Russian economy. The Russian president, though, also noting he believes it would be a calamitous event for the global economy, not just for Russia.
That was our correspondent Stuart Smith reporting from Moscow.
So let's get more on the prospect of Russia defaulting with Dr. Renaud Faucard, a senior lecturer in economics at Lancaster University's Management School. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. Now, I know there are various scenarios that could play out, and the market is basically expecting no payment. What will we know today?
Well, as of tomorrow, we should know if the payment has been actually done in US dollar. That would be the simplest outcome. This is, however, relatively unlikely to happen. So now, if the Russian government, as the finance minister has sort of pre-announced, is trying to make the payment in rubles, this would be a more contentious issue because there would need to be litigation. And also, you may be aware that with the sanctions, it's actually very unlikely that a Western company or government can actually get a payment in ruble paid by the Russian government. So in that case, we'll have to wait over the span of the next 30 days if there is some sort of agreement, but also to see the payments of Russian private companies, because there is the public debt of the Russian government, but also major companies, gas companies, but also banks, who will have to reimburse debt. And so as of today, what we know is that the market seems to price the default as being very, very, very likely. So if you are willing to buy now some Russian debt, you can have a very, very good price indeed.
What are the wider consequences of a Russian default to the wider global economy? I'm thinking back to Venezuela 2020. There wasn't much contagion. What's your view this time?
So there is one thing that is very peculiar with the Russian debt, is that no one was expecting that 2 months ago. So Russian bonds were seen as very, very, very safe due to the steady stream of income from the natural resources of the country. And so it takes everyone by surprise. This being said, the size of the Russian public debt is 20% of the GDP, and Russia is not such a huge economy, and the private sector is big, but overall it would be something big, perhaps bigger than, say, Argentina, but it's quite unlikely to be seen as a complete contagion on the global economic system. I would expect it, of course, for Russian citizens to be something, of course, extremely bad, on top of everything they have to go through at the moment. Of course, the war, the fact that at the same time, imagine you're a Russian family right now, you have your children who are sent to war, who may die, kill people, you can not exchange your currency, you cannot buy anything from Western companies, and on top of that, the country is defaulting, which means that if you want to borrow money, it's going to be extremely difficult.
We've heard about these domestic economic measures that Putin wants to put in place. What else could he realistically pull out of his economic toolbox next?
Well, I guess at the moment, given the current sanction, it's extremely difficult to get people from abroad to invest. And I'm not talking only about Western investors. If you think about countries that are not directly subject to sanctions, such as China, if you're a Chinese investor, you may want to go and say, like, oh, look, there is money to be made with all those Russian assets at bargain prices. But it's still a very risky operation, because the country may collapse at any moment. You may also be sanctioned indirectly because you are doing business with Russia. So at the moment, if you are the Russian government, the only thing you have in hand is rubles. And rubles may be worthless at any time. So they can spend a lot of money, they can print a lot of money, but inflation is very high, interest rates are already 20%, so it's a very difficult time indeed if you are just playing with the economy. Now, of course, there is something obvious that Vladimir Putin can do, is to try to buy peace, to somehow stop the invasion, and then try to get some guarantees to put the economy back on track. But of course, it will be extremely difficult.
So peace will save the Russian economy. Renaud Faucard, thank you very much.
Let's hope so.
Well, let's talk about United States markets now, where the Federal Reserve is set to raise interest rates for the first time since 2018 amid rising inflation. CGTN's correspondent John Terrace is watching events for us in New York. So, John, this rise, tell us more. And you're going to say inflation, no doubt.
Inflation, no doubt. There we are. I do what you tell me. Jamie and Julia. Look, this is the story of calming down inflation, okay? Because the best way, the globally recognized best way of doing that is to raise your interest rates, and that is what's going to happen today. Inflation in America, as you know, is at a 40-year high, although I must tell you that yesterday we had what they call PPI, which is wholesale inflation. In other words, what the manufacturers are paying, and it was up 10% year-on-year, February to February, very bad. But it was only up 0.8% January to February, and that was less than had been anticipated. So the market's like that yesterday and again today. But we know there's to be a hike in 90 minutes because Jerome Powell, the boss, has told us that there will be. He said there will be a quarter-point hike, 25 basis points. The only doubt here now today is, will it be 25 basis points or will it be 50? I mean, some people are politicians mostly, I think, are calling for the interest rate to go up by a full 1% and have done with it. I don't think that is going to happen. The Fed has to balance the very narrow path it has between managing inflation, pretty strong economic recovery in most areas of the U.S. economy going on, uncertainty that is Ukraine. Now, yesterday on the program, I told you all this was priced in, and, you know, I think it is mainly. But when we have this announcement at 2 p.m. local time, 18G, I would look out for a little bit of volatility. And the reason for that is there's so many retail day traders in the system now that we've not seen before, quite frankly, before COVID. And also, there's no playbook. There's no playbook here at all for going into a pandemic, coming out of a pandemic, going back into a pandemic, and then going straight into a potential global conflict like we have done. So for all of those reasons, I think we might actually see some volatility, maybe some wild swings in the next 90 minutes or so. And I was privileged to be on a conference call yesterday with one of the senior investors here who was advising his private clients. And I was listening to what he said. And he was basically begging them not to make any rash moves when they see the market move this afternoon. Don't do anything. Let it settle down, he said. You might like to reduce some of your positions. You have 100, go down to 50, or if you have 50, go down to 10 maybe. But don't wipe out your entire portfolio, was his advice. And of course, we expect more interest rate hikes to come as the year goes on, getting us to about 1% by the end of the year. Jamie and Juliet?
All of which begs the question, why the rally today?
It's a very good question. It is a good question. And it's also completely unexpected. I really think it is. Yesterday, the Dow was up 599 points. So we'll call that 600 points, won't we? Today it's up, as you'll see in a second, around 400 points. And the main reason, actually, I think, is that crude oil is down 22% in just over the last week. It was $130. I remember talking to Juliet on the program about this just over a week ago. Now it's down around $95, although it's not coming down on the forecourts, I will tell you, and Americans are pretty angry about that. And then there's the peace talks hopes as well that you've been reporting on. Zelensky saying the Russians are being more realistic. And then yesterday he said this, which really caught the market's attention. He said, "It is a truth that must be recognized that there is no path into NATO for Ukraine." Well, the markets heard that here, and they liked what they heard. All of this, of course, this talk and the oil coming down removes inflationary pressure from the markets. And so, in conclusion, right now we have the Dow up 429 points, 1.2%. And then would you believe the Chinese stocks here, the Chinese tech stocks, are leading the NASDAQ today, up 2.8%. Oil somewhere between 95 and 97 now, and gold, which is a hedge against worry, down around $16. We'll see what happens in 90 minutes.
We'll see. John, thanks for that. John Terrace, our correspondent in New York.
The UK Prime Minister is visiting the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, hoping to replace Russian fuel.
Boris Johnson has also promised to set out a new national energy strategy to tackle the rising cost of fossil fuels. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson reports.
A rush for energy has started. The government's message to the Middle East is clear. Please increase production and bring down the price of oil, at least for now. There are political misgivings within government over Saudi Arabia's human rights record, but Boris Johnson is adamant.
When we look at the dependency that the West in particular has built up on Putin's hydrocarbons, on Putin's oil and gas, we can see what a mistake that was, because he's been able to blackmail the West to hold Western economies to ransom. We need independence.
There's pressure also at home from the opposition.
I've got nothing against measures to try and bring the prices down in the short term. But, you know, Liz Truss was saying only the other day, we've got to stop relying on malign actors, and that's why they want to wean us off Russia. But you can't do that and then go cap in hand to Saudi Arabia. And so what we need is an energy strategy that has security, less imports, rely on renewables here, ramp up onshore and offshore wind, get nuclear going much more quickly.
The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is also busy, here welcoming President el-Sisi from Egypt. Riyadh is well aware of a changing energy landscape likely to include a future shift to renewables, perhaps away from oil. Saudi giant Aramco is open about exploring options.
China is an important part of the Aramco base. We have a huge interest in investing in China, and definitely we are looking at more investment in the China. And we are currently in discussion with a number of our partners in China for more investment.
It's a given that Europe must find an alternative to Russian oil. Moscow's ambitious gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, is also dead in the water. The desert kingdoms will be readying themselves for increased demand, but some analysts say the moment for a long overdue energy reset has arrived. Efficiency, renewables, subsidies, and a true political shift away from fossil fuels. The time has come for change.
Yeah, I think what's absolutely clear now is that peak fossil fuel demand is behind us. Peak fossil fuel demand, let me be clear, was 2019. It's never going to recover those levels. And the reason why is pretty obvious. It's basic economics. High prices in the presence of alternative solutions mean lower demand.
Extra oil for now may be the immediate fix, but the next 2 decades could chart a very different course to what the world has been used to for over a century.
2 British Iranians have been released and are heading back to the UK after spending years in detention in Iran. Aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and retired civil engineer Anousheh Ashuri were arrested in 2016 and 2017, respectively. They were jailed on charges that included spying and plotting to overthrow the government, charges both denied. Let's talk again to our correspondent, Andrew Wilson. A little bit more about the 2 and where they are now on their journey back to the UK.
Well, Julia, it's been an extraordinary day for both of those people. Mr. Ashuri released from prison this morning, and Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe allowed to go from her parents' home, where she's been under house arrest for the last year, to the airport, where they were told to stay and wait under guard from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. There was a British delegation there, we understand, and also her parents, but they were not allowed to stay in the same place. Her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, says that all morning they've been waiting to hear news from the airport. They knew that they'd gone to the airport, but they'd heard nothing else. They knew also that she'd been given her passport back by the Iranian authorities on Sunday, just past. And so there were things moving, but no confirmation. And then confirmation that a flight had taken off. A picture issued on social media of Nazanin boarding an aircraft, and also a picture of her actually on the plane. She's now in the air with Mr. Ashuri en route to the UK. It's been an extraordinary 6 years for both of those people, or 5 in the case of Mr. Ashuri, and it was never known right up until the last minute whether or not they would get this release, and no one's been wanting to make those predictions. But today, her husband said he feels light-spirited, much more pleased. He says a huge relief now that he knows she's on a plane and on her way home.
Andrew, a 6-year saga, as you say, for Nazanin, 5 for Anousheh. How did we get to this point?
There's been a series of dual nationality Iranians imprisoned over the last 10 years or so, all being held under the pretext of some sort of disloyalty to the government or spying or espionage, and all being traded with their governments for various things in return for the Iranian government. In the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, that was the return to the Iranians of $530 million that they sent to the British government in the 70s as a down payment for a consignment of chieftain tanks for their armed forces. But that was the time of the Shah of Iran, and then the revolution happened and the whole thing went away. But the money remained outstanding, and they've been asking for it back ever since. Other binationals have been held to argue about other and different issues. But this was the one that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was held in conjunction with, and all the discussions of her release were related to this money. We've now had it confirmed from the British government that they have found a way of repaying that debt, which they admit was legitimate, but would have been a violation of US sanctions to pay to the Iranians. It now seems that with the guarantee that it'll be spent on humanitarian issues rather than on anything else, that money has been cleared to be returned to Iran, and so a deal has indeed, in this case, been done. Andrew Wilson in Oxford, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, NATO defence ministers meet in Brussels along with the Ukrainian ambassador. We'll be reporting from NATO headquarters.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliette Mann. Our top stories. Ukraine and Russia are reported to have made significant progress on a peace plan, including a ceasefire and Russian withdrawal.
A personal appeal to US President Joe Biden as Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky makes an emotional plea for help to the United States Congress.
And a tsunami warning has been issued in Japan after a powerful earthquake off the Fukushima coastline.
NATO defence ministers at an emergency meeting in Brussels say they will continue to help Ukraine's fight off Russia's invasion.
Ukrainian ambassador, along with defence ministers from Finland, Georgia and Sweden, are also attending.
Our correspondent Linda Kennedy is at NATO headquarters. Linda, what's come out of this meeting today?
Well, it concluded just a short while ago, and the Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, was giving his summary of what had been discussed. And he was saying that there was going to be a continuation of significant support to Ukraine and that there would be more military supplies, financial health, his expression, and also humanitarian aid. But he wasn't just looking at what the immediate future held. He also talked about the fact that they had decided NATO needs a reset, that the collective defence of countries is something that has to be addressed in order for NATO to have more of a deterrent presence. In terms of specifics, arms going to Ukraine, well, that's coming from individual NATO countries, not the alliance as a group. Russia has said that it regards arms going to Ukraine from NATO as legitimate targets, but despite that, there was defiance from the Defence Minister of the Netherlands. Here's what she had to say.
I think it's very important to continue to deliver because President Zelensky is asking for weapons and Ukraine has the right to defend itself. And therefore we as the Netherlands intend to continue, as other countries will. And I think that the fact that he is saying that they could be a target shows that it is something that is feared.
Linda, Ukraine's President Zelensky has now said Ukraine will not now seek to join NATO. How significant is that?
It is significant, but it's clear today at NATO that whilst there is concern for Ukraine, there is a lot of concern beyond Ukraine and ensuring that this does not widen into a NATO conflict and a NATO war. And that is not something that is impossible. The German Defence Minister, Christine Lambrecht, was saying that a Russian attack on a NATO country could not be ruled out. We also heard from another of the Defence Ministers, US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, renewing the American commitment to Article 5 of NATO's Charter, which is saying that an attack on one is an attack on all. We'll hear more about how NATO is going to move forward at another meeting next week, an extraordinary summit, and that's one that US President Joe Biden is going to be attending here at NATO headquarters.
Linda, thanks for that. Our correspondent Linda Kennedy in Brussels.
Germany is boosting its military spending, borrowing $220 billion this year. The move marks the third consecutive year Germany has breached constitutional debt limits. It's also the second highest budget in Germany's post-war history, just short of last year's spending. Let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray. Trent, the new German government's spending big on defence.
Yeah, they certainly are. It really is an unprecedented budget, but it, of course, is an unprecedented time. As you said, borrowing heading upwards of $220 billion US, much of that going into defence. The German cabinet today giving the final sign-off to Chancellor Scholz's personal plan to give an immediate cash injection of 100 billion euros into the German military. That was an announcement he, of course, made around 2 weeks ago to the German parliament after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It has certainly concentrated many, many minds here in Berlin, and we are now seeing really the government put its money where its mouth is, trying to really very quickly bring up the quality of the German military, the numbers, the amount of equipment it has, all as Europe faces this very uncertain situation regarding regional security. Let's just have a listen to what Chancellor Scholz has had to say about that spending.
What is also important for us is that we deal with the consequences that this has for our own future. That is why we had a long discussion about defense and security, and in that context we agreed that we need to do more together to ensure the security of Europe, including all of us spending more on defense than we have in the past.
Much of that spending and borrowing as well is also being attributed to the coronavirus pandemic. In many ways, the German economy is still trying to recover from the effects that it's had. Christian Lindner, the finance minister, is saying he is keen to get borrowing down next year, bringing back that so-called debt break. Germany, the government normally likes to be quite frugal in its spending, but of course he says with both the COVID-19 pandemic and now the war in Ukraine, this really very large amount of borrowing is justified.
So, Trent, how much of this new budget is a reaction to the Russian assault on Ukraine?
Juliet, I don't think there's really any other way of saying it. It's completely due to Ukraine. I mean, I covered the German election last year very closely, and I really can't recall any major campaign events from the big parties that were centred on defence spending. It's politically just not a very popular thing here in Germany. But Chancellor Scholz, a centre-left social democrat, has now found himself with the position of authorising this huge defence spending bill. Of course, Germany has often faced uncomfortable accusations that as the European Union's biggest and most richest country, it hasn't invested enough in its military. It's often been the thorn in the side between German and US relations, especially under former President Donald Trump. So really, all of that now has changed because of what's happened in Ukraine. Germany is not only promising to pledge $100 billion right now to the German military, but also moving forward is committing to those NATO targets of 2% every year of its GDP to be spent on the German military. It is a complete game changer, and in many, many ways it is all due to the decisions of President Putin in recent weeks.
Huge game changer. Trent Murray, thank you very much.
Well, as companies around the world distance themselves from Russia, one of the world's most iconic vodka brands has changed its name. Stolichnaya vodka will now be known as Stoli, a direct response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's talk to Damien McKinney, the chief executive of the Stoli Group. Welcome. So, Russian association in the name or the brand is clearly toxic for business.
Hi, Jamie. Toxic today. For very good reason. We made the decision, if I may, first of all, on very personal reasons. I was a former Royal Marine Commando. You were just talking about defence previous to this discussion. I got a founder who spent 20 years fighting against what is an evil regime. And I have a group of people within my team in the company and indeed our partners who made it very clear that they stand against what has happened in Ukraine and therefore very simply to make it clear to everybody, but also we're making a statement, remove the Chennaya, we're Stoli, it's very clear and simple, we're a Latvian company based in Luxembourg, a NATO country.
What did you fear from consumers and for the safety of staff if you hadn't done this?
The honest truth is I didn't fear anything from consumers or staff. And I'll tell you why. Number one is because I do think that a company or a team, whoever it is, I think if we've learned nothing else by this recent crisis, that you have to stand up for what you believe. And therefore, it doesn't matter. Frankly, honestly, it doesn't matter the effect on the business. We felt very strongly that we had to stand up and be counted as leaders and as a team. So that's the first thing. I think the second is facts speak for themselves. So, when the invasion occurred on Thursday, the 24th of February, there was an outpouring of emotion over the next 2 days, and you will have seen people pouring vodka down the drain. We had our fair share of people coming out saying, you're Russian. Well, I'm no different to those people pouring it away in a sense, in that it was a high degree of emotion. I've seen things in my previous life, the horrors of war, that the last thing I ever wanted to see was that played back on the screen. And we were facing it, and we're seeing it on a daily basis. So I absolutely stood up for people saying, I want to make a statement. The key then is making sure everybody understands the facts. And so we went out very quickly, as you will appreciate, and said, we understand your position. Please, by the way, we support it, and we've been involved in the resistance, and we agree that this is about evil being called out. But we are Latvian. So let's talk about the facts. We're Latvian, we're vodka's born in Latvia. Oh, and by the way, we have partners in Ukraine, we have employees in Ukraine, we have partners in other countries around. So once we played through the facts, what we found very, very quickly is that people came back and said, okay, we get where you stand, we get who you are. And I suppose the one extra part of this is our wish to then get involved. And obviously, whether that's actually helping my own employees getting out of the country, or indeed supporting husbands and loved ones still actually in the country fighting, and indeed our partners. And then indeed supporting World Central Kitchen with Jose Andes.
Let me just ask you how the Stoli Group has been supporting operations and staff in and around Ukraine since the invasion. I mean, this is a tough call for businesses trying to do business there.
No, it's a great question, and I think in many cases, and we did move some people out of the country before the invasion. You know, you could read the tea leaves, you could see it happening. But in most cases, it was women and children, some of whom are staff, by the way. The issue really subsequently has been, how do you, for instance, one of members of my staff had a mother who was very sick, going through the final stage of chemotherapy in Kyiv hospital. So how do you deal with getting her out? We've managed to get her to Luxembourg. So there's a kind of an initial triage. I think the phase we're in at the moment is probably, look, that's tragic and it's very difficult, and you need to move people away from, frankly, the horror of what they're facing. But we're in a different phase now. And I put it into two parts. Number one is you know, and I think I've described it as, when you're a refugee and you're a new refugee, the kind of global machine and aid agencies are pretty good. They get wound up and they support you. But after a couple of weeks, you actually become old news. But you yourself realize that this isn't where I want to be. I don't want to be on the border. I actually need to start to work out where my life is going. Obviously money and living. So one of the things we've been doing now is working with some of the refugees, and in many cases our partners. We've got a distributor and suppliers on the ground. So we've actually been moving them to other countries, Latvia being the obvious one in this case, and actually settling them down into a new environment. And then talking about, okay, what does your next chapter look like in terms of getting jobs? But I think the thing that I've learned most is, the easy bit is just moving somebody, giving them some money and saying, there's somewhere to live. Actually, the environment's so different, even language is different, that what I call pastoral care becomes really important. So one of the things we're trying to do is say, here's the baker's shop and here's the people you need to speak to. So that's one part of it. The other part of it then is the people left behind in Ukraine. And, you know, I'll give you an example of one of my team whose husband is there in Kyiv fighting. And it's as little as us keeping in contact with him. I've often described my own military background where there's that 3 o'clock in the morning moment when you are cold, wet, you're very tired, and frankly, you're terrified. You're afraid of what happens. However brave you think you are.
Damien, I'm going to interrupt you because we're up against it time-wise, but good to talk to you, and thank you so much for coming on the programme. Damien McKinney, the Chief Executive of Story Group. Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. China battles in a new surge of COVID cases. Its biggest outbreak in 2 years. Lockdowns and mass testing are back.
This is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated. It's the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. 3 European prime ministers have arrived back in Poland after their visit to war-torn Kyiv.
The leaders of the Czech Republic, Poland and Slovenia made the journey by train as a show of solidarity with Ukraine. Our correspondent Mia Alberti reports.
This is not your typical meeting of European leaders. With little formality, the prime ministers of Slovenia, Poland and Czech Republic met in Kyiv with Ukrainian president. A powerful show of support to deliver a simple but strong message.
You are fighting for
your lives, your freedom, but we know that you are also fighting for our lives and our freedom, and they are not alone, that Europe stands with you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
These leaders traveled by train into the heart of the war-torn country. A risky trip, but one that sends a strong signal that Kyiv remains in Ukrainian hands. One of the main topics on the table was Ukraine's request to join the European Union.
And the European Union has to give very quickly a candidate status, and more than this, has to invite Ukraine to the European Union and all the defensive weapons to defend your homes.
If we are looking across Europe now, we don't see any other country which is fighting for European values more than Ukrainian people are doing currently.
These are not guarantees, but it's a start.
We absolutely trust these countries and the leaders of these countries, so when we speak about the guarantees of our security, about our future in the European Union, or talk about the sanctions policy, we are 100% sure that everything we discuss will achieve its goals for our country, our security and our future.
Outside in Kyiv, the battle raged on. The perfect proof that Ukraine needs any kind of support it can get at this time. Mia Alberti, CGTN.
Millions of people may have fled the fighting in Ukraine, but millions more have been forced to take shelter across the country to avoid the shelling.
Among them is one of Ukraine's biggest rock stars, Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, the lead singer of the band Okioneltsi. He spoke to CGTN's Stephen Cole.
Right now I am in the eastern city of Kharkiv, which is right now bombed by Russian army, and we are in an improvised impromptu bomb shelter, which is right in the underground. So imagine you're in an underground in London, and it's a bomb shelter. It's typical. So where are we now? And people around me are actually having a shelter here.
What is morale like where you are?
The morale is very good. People are calm. People are focused. You can see a lot of ordinary people. You can see even small babies here, and some of them are literally being born here. So this is completely ruined of a normal course of life. But everybody is absolutely determined to stay together till we win.
You recently joined the Ukrainian army. Why did you do that?
Because I think it's my obligation to defend my country, and millions of Ukrainian men did the same thing, territorial self-defense or army. Because I had my previous training as an army officer, I did it. I mostly now fight with my voice and with my words, but if necessary, I'll certainly will be ready to pick up the gun and fight. And
what have you been doing since you joined up?
Mostly supporting people like these. They need support in every city. They need somebody who they know to tell them that everything's going to be all right. I meet people in different cities, army officers and soldiers. We go to hospital, we bring some aid, and not only me. There are many other people. Like over there is a famous Ukrainian poet, Serhiy Zhadan. He's over there. He's very modest. The guy who actually is now nominated for the Nobel Prize from Ukraine. So he's next to me, and you can see him. And he's my friend, and we are together.
You're a very famous musician. You're a rock star. Can music help? Is music helping you cope and other people cope?
It's not time for music, but generally people listen to the music that pumps up their mood, and it helps a lot. But now the most help we need, it's not music. It's anti-missile defense systems and planes and closing the sky over Ukraine. This is the help that we need now. And then when we win, we'll have a lot of music.
Kazakhstan's president has proposed constitutional reforms to limit the powers of his office. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev says the country needs to switch from what he calls super-presidential rule to a presidential republic with a strong parliament. Tokayev suppressed a coup attempt in January in which over 200 people died.
The DPRK's latest missile test has failed. According to the South Korean military, it's said to have exploded shortly after takeoff from an airfield outside the capital, Pyongyang, with debris landing near the city. The United States and South Korea say they believe the North is attempting to launch a full-range intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time in 5 years.
There have been protests in India after a court upheld a ban on wearing hijabs in classrooms. Hundreds of students marched through the city of Chennai following the ruling on Karnataka State. The original ban led to large protests by some Muslim groups, with counter-protests by Hindu students. China is battling a new wave of COVID. The Chinese mainland has reported an additional 1,800 COVID cases as the province of Jilin in the country's biggest outbreak in almost 2 years.
Officials are trying to contain the virus through mass testing and lockdown. CGTN's correspondent Zhou Jiaxin reports.
China is facing its largest COVID outbreak in the past 2 years. The city of Shenzhen, bordering Hong Kong, has gone into lockdown, with intensive PCR testing underway. The northeastern province of Jilin reported over 3,000 confirmed cases on Monday alone. 2 mayors have been removed from their posts in Jilin after a surge of Omicron cases over the past weekend. The latest flare-up has overwhelmed hospitals and required makeshift facilities.
China has in recent weeks faced growing pressure from imported infections. Community outbreaks are significantly increased and expanded. The past 2 weeks recorded more than 15,000 locally transmitted cases. Task forces are already on the ground in several hard-hit provinces to coordinate an orderly response. The epidemic situation is generally under control.
Around 90% of the Chinese population have been vaccinated. The policy requires zone control, swift testing, centralized quarantine, and timely treatment.
China's mobile testing capacity has been greatly increased, and mobile testing support has been strengthened. There are about 124,000 testing facilities nationwide, with an overall testing capacity of 46 million tubes per day. Our information system also helps improve the efficiency of nucleic acid detection and shortens the time period to issue results.
China has just approved 5 brands of rapid antigen self-testing to accelerate an earlier COVID screening. It indicates a new set of methods to deal with the epidemic may be on the way. Local officials are also encouraged to strike a rational balance in measures between virus control and maintaining economic activities. Zhou Jiaxin, CGTN, Beijing.
The headlines again. Ukraine and Russia are reported to have made significant progress on a peace plan, including a ceasefire and Russian withdrawal.
A personal appeal to US President Joe Biden as Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky makes an emotional plea for help to the United States Congress.
A tsunami warning has been issued in Japan after a powerful earthquake off the coast of Fukushima.
And China battles a new surge in COVID cases, its biggest outbreak in 2 years. Lockdowns and mass testing are back.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com, the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.